So we're on the series, 3-week series, Act Justly, Love Mercy, and Walk Humbly with Our God. And that comes from the writings of a prophet called Micah. And Micah says this in chapter 6, verse 8, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." So we've been taking each one of those each week. So, but one thing you need to know is the top and bottom are in reverse order. So last week Joe looked at walk humbly. This week we'll look at love mercy, and then next week will be act justly. And as I said in the last service, why are we doing that? Because it's impossible for Joe to follow a chronological order. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, there actually is, right? So there's always a method to the madness, I'm sure. If we were in your head, we would get that. No, in this case, like really, the idea of justice and mercy have to be framed in the idea of humility. And if you missed the message last week, it was awesome. And I would say go on the website or on your app and watch that, listen to that. By the way, somebody reminded me today on the app, if the service times are wrong, you got to go to the little settings and hit the little synchronize thing, and that updates it. Because they're actually right on the website, but if you didn't update it on your phone, then it'll have the old times. Okay, little off course there. So as we look at week 2, this idea of loving mercy, and we go back to our scripture, what is mercy? There's a lot of words in the Greek and the Hebrew, all of that. Sometimes it's hard to come up with one definition. One writer says, many different words and concepts are involved in explaining mercy. It is loving kindness, pity, compassion, coming from the very center of the being of the one who is merciful. And so one of the things I think that pops out a lot, if you had to pick one, would be this idea of compassion. This idea of compassion. And if we go back to our scripture, there's keywords, a couple of important keywords that I want to look at today. One of them is obvious, that's mercy. But the other one isn't so obvious. And I'm not going to tell you which one it is yet, because I want us to watch something. And often when we think of justice, mercy, that can be in the judicial system. And so I want to watch a clip of a judge who, will give us an idea of what this key word we're going to look at, the other key word is. And so you might have seen this. This has gone around. I think it even made the news at one time when it came out. But this is a judge. It's just, the traffic court thing. And she has these traffic tickets. And he's going to, give us a demonstration of this key word we're talking about. So let's take a look.
Then you got a ticket on Friendship Street in 2008. That was a parking meter on Friendship Street. That's going to cost you $25. Then you have a parking meter in 2014 on Friendship Street. It's going to cost you $25. So far you're doing pretty good because all you got is $50. And now you have 4 parking tickets.
Are you talking about the most recent ones now?
Most recent ones, right.
All right. The one on 11-1.
On the Nissan.
Yeah, the one on 11-1, I went to Social Security because they had cut my check. Because my son was recently killed last year. So they cut my check because he had owed money.
Who?
My son was killed March of last year, right? So I was his rep payee. So they took my money because he had owed money. So I had to go to Social Security to fix that matter. When I came out, I had a ticket. Then another time on the 5th, the parking meter wasn't working. I have the picture for that. On 1/4, I was at court because my landlord was trying to evict me. So I was at eviction court. Come out, I got a ticket. Mind you, he won possession of the apartment, so I had to move. So I got a ticket, he won possession of the apartment. Then I get another one because I tried to go to the legal services to try to get help to fix this. I go get some change out of Dunkin' Donuts, come out, I got a $100 ticket.
I'm going to take all of the circumstances that you just have explained to me into consideration and see if I can balance the equities to protect the interest of the city and take into consideration, the horrific story that you just told us relative to your son. I don't think anyone in their lifetime would ever want to experience that, so.
It's the worst feeling in the world. I feel so empty and lost.
I'm going to reduce this to $50. How much time do you need to pay it?
I have it on me now.
All right. That's not going to leave you without any money, is it?
I'll leave it with $5. Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm not going to leave you with $5. I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to dismiss everything.
Thank you.
All right. With our best wishes and hope that things turn around good for you. Okay.
Thank you, Your
Good luck to you. Good luck.
I'm going to take all the circumstances you just explained to me into consideration. We get the lights on, please. So the word we want to look for, the other key word, is and. Because when we think about this, it's not justice or mercy. It's justice and mercy. And what the and does is it brings in the person as a human being. It brings in the other circumstances. The judge could have just went, all right, you got these tickets, you owe this money, pay it, get out, next. And sometimes that happens, right, in courts. But this guy said, wait a minute, there's more going on. There's a human being at stake. There's something more. And he added in the and mercy into the situation. And really, when we think about mercy, it's a mindset. It really has to be a mindset. And, psychologists sometimes use this word mindsets, fixed mindsets, growth mindsets. And a fixed mindset is where I kind of just stay in the same way of thinking. And everything gets filtered in, and all my thoughts and beliefs and everything are here, and I stay with where I'm at, and the other people have theirs, and I don't ever want to move from that. And I think as human beings, we kind of do that anyway, don't we? I know I do. I want to go to a side. I want to go, I want to go to this side or that side and not be in the middle. And maybe it's because it feels safe there. And maybe it feels like everything's kind of explained in my spot and it's cut and dry. But when I try to move towards other people or other beliefs or other, opinions or thoughts, now I'm in the middle and it's kind of uncomfortable and it's messy and it's weird and it's not all cut and dry. So I want to run to a side. But mercy says we got to have a mindset that wants growth, that's open to connecting with those people that I might not agree with. And so, how can we love mercy? Well, we're going to take action. We'll look at 3 B's. And so the first B is behold. And what is it we want to behold? We want to behold that God is merciful, and we want to behold that I need mercy. You need mercy. And to be able to frame it in that. So one way of looking at how God is merciful is we take a look in the Scripture, and if we start with the Old Testament, sometimes people are a little uncomfortable with that. I've heard people say, I don't even like to look at the Old Testament because there God he's mean and he's angry and people are dying and I don't look at that. I just want to see Jesus. But of course the Old Testament, it's not a different God. In fact, the Old Testament is filled with descriptions of God as a loving God, a compassionate God, a merciful God. And you can see the poets writing about it, the prophets writing about it, over and over and over and over. Because when you look back at what are the people living in the Old Testament times saying about God? They were seeing his mercy and love. And we're looking at the book of Micah right now, that prophet. So if we just take him and we go from chapter 6 to 7, he says this: who is a God like you, who pardons sins and forgives the transgression of the remnant of his inheritance? You do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy. Anybody notice anything familiar about those words? Kelly does. Yeah, we actually sing some of those words in the song Kyrie eleison, which we'll sing at the end of service. You know, those are part of the lyrics. And, you know, that's the Old Testament talking about just one example out of many, many, many examples of how God is merciful. And then when we come to the New Testament, there's Jesus himself. As Joe said last week, you know, Jesus came down and humbled himself and became a human being. And he shows us the Father. Often Jesus would say, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And he enacts who the Father is, and he personifies in his being mercy and all the other characters of God. He personifies it. But he also teaches about mercy through his sermons, through story. And there's one story in particular that's very powerful that I think portrays mercy. And that's the story of the prodigal son. And that's the painting, Rembrandt's famous painting of the return of the prodigal son. And Pope John Paul, who's gone now, he wrote an encyclical on mercy. And in that encyclical, it's very good. And he talks about a lot of things about mercy. But one of the things he says is, in the New Testament, what strikes him is that this story is such a great story to see and behold mercy. In fact, he says, this exact picture of the prodigal son's state of mind enables us to understand exactly what the mercy of God consists in. It shows us that. And so, as we are going to see this story, want us to know a couple things. First, what is the context of it? And so the context of it is, you know, there was these group of guys that would follow Jesus around called the Pharisees. And they had a closed mindset. For them, everything, you were either in the category where you lived this holy, pure life. You followed all the laws in Judaism down to the letter. And that was it. And then there were all the other people. They were the impure people. You keep away from them. They're on their side. They're wrong. We're right. We do the right thing. They do the wrong thing. And that's it. And so, you know, Jesus would always be talking to these guys, and he'd be saying things like, look, yeah, you guys do a lot of good things. You follow the law, but you miss the big picture. You strain out little bugs and you swallow a huge animal. You miss it. Because the essence, the reason you're doing these little things is because of the big thing, which is mercy and justice and faithfulness. And you guys miss that. And so in this story in Luke, they're again missing it. And they're accusing Jesus. They said he eats with sinners and tax collectors. They're basically saying, you know, dude, you're getting off your side. We don't do that. You're walking towards these other people. You're hanging out with these other people. Get over on your side. What are you doing? And Jesus was trying to, again, show them, because that's the heart of God. That's the mercy. That's what you add into your life that you guys miss. So he told them 3 stories to maybe hopefully help them see it again. And it was a story of the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the third story, the prodigal son, the lost son. So the context of it is he's trying to get these people with the fixed mindset that don't get the mercy thing to be able to see that mercy. And so the other thing I want us to think about as we watch this story is to think about, where am I at? The main 2 characters are 2 brothers. Well, the father is the main character. He represents God. But the 2 brothers represent parts of humanity, really all of humanity. So to say, as I see this, where do I fit? Should I put this on the floor? Oh, I'm going to do that.
Yeah, then you can put it right there.
Okay. So instead of just, I guess if that does that, we can just kill the mic for the drama too. So instead of just reading this story, I want to portray it in a dramatic way. It'll be right from the Bible, hopefully, every word. But because I think that helps us kind of get a hold of emotionally these characters in the story, to be able to see and behold not just the mercy of the Father, but where do I fit in the story? So this is Luke 15, the prodigal son. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one went to his father and said, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So his father divided up his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, and he went out to a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in riotous living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that country, and he began to be in need. So he hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him out into his field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and I'm here starving to death?" I'll go back to my father. I'll say, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son, but make me like one of your hired men." So he went off, and he went back to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. And he said to his father, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to one of his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put the ring on his fingers. Put sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, because this, my son, was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost, and now he's found." And they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older brother was out in the fields. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants over and asked him what was going on. "No, your brother's returned," he replied. "Your father's killed the fattened calf because he hasn't back safe and sound." The older brother was angry and refused to go in. So his father came out to him. He said to his father, "All these years, I have been slaving for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. But you've never given me a young goat to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who squandered all your property with prostitutes, comes home, oh, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "I am always with you. You are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost, and now he is found." So who do you relate to in that story? The elder son, the younger son? When we think about the story and we think about Rembrandt's painting, there was a guy, a Christian writer, Henry Nouwen, and he spent many, many hours just in sitting in front of this painting and contemplating the characters and the story and letting God speak to him. And we often think about, the prodigal son, and he's kind of the focus, and he needs, it's obvious when we behold mercy, he needs it. But what about the older son? I mean, he really didn't do anything wrong. Does he need mercy? And Henry Nouwen says this is not a story that separates the two brothers into the good and the evil one. The father only is good. He loves both sons. He runs out to meet both. He wants both to sit at his table and participate in the joy. And so Henry Nouwen's talking about like this older son. He's the guy that, sometimes we can feel like, well, we're justified. We didn't do anything wrong. I don't need God to change me. But he had internal stuff going on that wasn't helpful in his life, where it's obvious with the younger guy, he has all this external stuff. And, Henry Nouwen talks about the older brother just sort of outside the party looking in, out there in the darkness. And he says this, as long as I stay outside in the darkness, I can only remain in the resentful complaint that results from my comparisons. As he compares himself to his brother. And as Henry Nouwen was reading this, he was realizing like the older brother needs to come home too. And he was seeing himself in the older brother, and he's like, I don't like that. And sometimes I want to see myself only as the younger one who gets the mercy, but not the older one who's self-righteous and unforgiving. And Henry Nouwen says this, God is urging me to come home, to enter into his light, and to discover there that in God, all people are uniquely and completely loved. In the light of God, I can finally see my neighbor as my brother, as the one who belongs as much to God as I do. But outside of God's house, brothers and sisters, husbands and wives, lovers and friends become rivals and even enemies, each perpetually plagued by jealousies, suspicions, and resentments. So both brothers are in need of God's mercy. They are in need of change. And that's because, as the Apostle Paul said, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All of us. Wherever you fit in, you're part of the all, and so am I. So we all need to receive and not just behold God's mercy. And as we do that, we come to the second action, which is to become. Become merciful. Jesus says in Luke, be merciful just as your heavenly Father, just as your Father is merciful. One writer talking about this says, mercy is not merely something that God shows to us, which he does, we behold it. Mercy is a quality that God expects in us, for those who live close to the Lord are to reflect his character. So when we think about this idea of becoming merciful, you have to ask, who does this include? Because, when you think about the older brother, he could say, I got a pretty good case that I did nothing wrong. And, a lot of times as I stand on my side and I feel right, and maybe I am right about a lot of things, and I can point to the other people and all their wrongness, I miss something when I do that. I miss something. But we can't ignore the fact that there are people that haven't done anything wrong. There are people that are innocent victims. There are people who, and I know as a counselor that I talk to all the time, that have been horribly abused as children, as teenagers, as adults, sexually, emotionally, physically. And they didn't ask for that. They were helpless. They were victims. And they have the right to be angry and to point and say, you deserve that. I don't. I didn't ask for this. So should those people become merciful? Is that even reasonable to ask them that? And you might even say, maybe it's not reasonable. And I don't know if it's reasonable to ask us to love everybody, even our enemies, to turn the other cheek. A lot of things God calls us to do might not sound reasonable, but they're good for us. He wouldn't be saying that to us if it wasn't. And when we can't do those things, that's when we need help. We say, God, I need help. I want to be merciful, but I need your power and help. So it's getting off that one side and coming into the middle, the both and. There's a writer who wrote a book called The Spirituality of the Beatitudes. Those are those scriptures where Jesus said, blessed are those, blessed are those. And one of them says, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And as this writer was talking about mercy, he said this. He said, not too many years ago, I was very angry at individuals, at groups, at white people, at the corporations, at the United States, at the Pope, and I discovered at myself especially. Many reacted to my anger with their own. Once I realized that my anger was based in a lack of pathos or compassion, I discovered that care, mercy, and genuine understanding must be at the heart of evangelization that invites people, groups, and institutions to conversation. He's saying, look, I want things to be different. I want things to change. I want to show evangelization. I want to show the love of God. But as long as I just stay in my spot, in my rightness, in my anger, and I point fingers and point out where all those other people are bad, nothing really helps. Nothing changes. I got to change my thinking. I got to add the and mercy into my life and have a conversation. Joe was saying last week that as Christians, we need to show we're different. If we're going to show the love of God, everybody can easily stand on a side and point to the other. But to show the love of God says, I'm going to do something more, something different. There's a story of a woman who learned to become merciful. It happened several years ago. Maybe you've heard her story. Her name's Thomas Ann Hines. And Thomas Ann Hines, her son was killed by a carjacker, her 21-year-old son, shot and killed. They later caught the guy. His name was Charles White. And she was so distraught after this happened. She attempted suicide at one point in her life. And she got past that. She started to work things out. One of the ways she would work out what was going on inside of her was to work with advocacy groups who would, help victims of crimes. In one of the groups she was with, they would go into prisons and talk to prisoners and try to explain to prisoners like how their crimes affect the innocent victim. And she said she had this sort of edge about her, this anger, because in her heart she said, I hated Charles White and I wanted him to rot in prison. And we could say, well, doesn't she have a case there that it makes sense she's angry about that? And she kept that anger in, but she would still go and talk to prisoners. But when she did, it was kind of a way, too, to work out like, I'm going to show you what you're doing and hurting people, and that's it. I'm not really concerned about your life. I'm just showing you to punish you in some sense. And as one time when she was going to talk to this group of prisoners, she saw this guy, inmate, out in the audience, said a red-haired guy, reminded her of her son. This was many years later. She said, oh, that could have been my son's brother. And then it dawned on her, what would a mother say to these people? They're all sons. They had a mother. What would a mother say to these inmates? And that really changed her. She said this, as told through Hope magazine. She was instantly transformed from an angry lecturer to a compassionate mother. In that moment, she says, I realized that even though victims have every right to their pain, we can also turn it around. She's saying, yes, people, they have a right to be angry. It is pain. But to turn it around, she meant maybe I can actually help them change their life. And she started to take on and become merciful herself. And so we want to take on mercy, and then the last action is to do something, to go out and bestow that mercy on other people. And when we go back to our story about Thomas Ann Hines, as she was talking to prisoners, one day a prisoner came up to her and was saying, you got to keep doing this. Keep talking like this because it just means so much. And he started to tell her his story, how he had shot a young man and how he had taken his car and all this. And as she's listening to this story, it was so much like her son's story and what happened to her, it kind of triggered her. But then after a while, she started to think, you know, maybe I need to meet with my son's killer, Charles White. And she didn't do it right away, and over time, she started to think about that, and a third party came in and helped orchestrate this meeting. He was still in jail, in prison at the time. He'd been a multiple offender in prison while he was there. He was constantly, you know, having these major things he would do wrong in prison. And so anyway, this meeting happens where she meets finally face-to-face with her killer. And again, told in Hope magazine. And there's a picture of her with Charles White. And it says this: the emotional session lasted 8 hours with a 40-minute break for lunch. I went in there totally for me, admits Hines, but it changed for me as he listened to me and I listened to him. A conversation. At one point, I remember saying, if you knew how much I loved him, meaning her son, you wouldn't have shot him. And he just folded. That sad, troubled boy let me see inside his soul. I began to feel such compassion. She was saying is, look, now that I'm getting to hear you and know you, if you really knew what my son meant to me, I can see there's enough something in you, you wouldn't have even shot him. Wow. And that actually not only transformed her, it changed him. And he went from having major, penalties and infractions in prison down to just a couple minor ones. He started to think about, hey, maybe I'll go back to school, get my GED. Maybe I want to be a better person because of mercy bestowed on him. And so when we were saying, what about the innocent victim, we see how much it changed her for the better as she took that step out, added the and became more merciful. So when we put them all together, we think of this idea, these three actions of beholding and being, becoming and bestowing, comes up to our call to faith. Simple question: who do I need to be merciful to?